Okay, right off the top, this video will contain spoilers for the entire season of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Click away now if you don't want anything spoiled. Alright, so I just finished watching the finale, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The action was incredible, and Sam looked amazing in his new suit. I kind of wish we'd had some more closure with certain plot lines, but it was still a really solid episode. Overall, I really liked this series. In my opinion, it's better than WandaVision. Instead of relying on flashy visuals, they took a pretty traditional MCU story and delved deep with it. They tackled some heavier themes and ideas, and while they may have not landed all of them, I'm really glad they took them on. I do have a few gripes and notes about the show, though. However, if you're only interested in hearing about my pitch for the episode I think they should have made, skip to this time. For now, though, I'm going to talk a bit about what I liked and disliked with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. First of all, it's important to acknowledge something with this show. I think its main and maybe only goal was to tell the character stories of Sam and Bucky. That's the whole point, giving arcs for two heroes that have been underserved in the movies. Everything else is just background, a platform for these two to go through their journeys on. Sure, it's really interesting, engaging background stuff, but nearly everything about the show is in service of them. And I don't have a problem with this. If you want to get the most out of the show, I suggest looking at it through this lens, because there are definitely some elements that may seem confusing or half-baked, but I found that tracking Sam and Bucky's growth in each episode provided the most enjoyment, and elevated the show above a lot of other MCU entries. Second, I absolutely loved the character of John Walker. That does not mean I think he's a hero or anything, I just mean the writing they did with him was superb. Despite the heavy focus on Sam and Bucky, they still did an incredible job with him. Wyatt Russell did absolutely fantastic work with the performance, and deserves some serious recognition for it. In my opinion, Walker is one of the most layered and interesting antagonists the MCU has put forward. They presented a really great, warped take on an American symbol. And the whole time, even when Walker was at his worst, all I could think about was how painfully human he was. He's a flawed man, and not only that, but a veteran, who's most likely suffering from some form of PTSD. Something from his past is haunting him, and now he has to take up the mantle of a legend. Of course he's going to crack under the pressure. However, I don't think the show had quite enough time for him, or Carly for that matter. This goes back to what I was saying with this being Sam and Bucky's show. I think John's journey was a little more fleshed out, but it's definitely missing some key steps. And Carly really could have used at least 20 more minutes to establish who she was and to make the Flag Smashers' goals crystal clear. On the topic of those two, I thought the show did a great job of reimagining Dr. Erskine's words about how good becomes great, bad becomes worse. Because back when the serum was first invented, the world was a lot more black and white, at least how the MCU presented it. Steve was born into a world with clearly defined good and bad. That shaped him to know right from wrong in the simplest of ways. So when Steve and Red Skull get the serum, it amplifies them in a very simplistic way. Steve becomes extremely good, Red Skull becomes extremely bad. But the world isn't so simple anymore. There's a lot more gray, and we see Steve struggle with that gray in his movies. At the end of the day, though, he still has the moral compass born of his time period. He holds on to his black and white notions. Even in Winter Soldier, where the organization he believed to be good turns out to be Hydra, it's still fairly simple for him. He now recognizes them as bad, and does all he can to take them down. But now, in this show, we get to see how the serum amplifies people who are born into a world of gray. And I thought they did a great job with that. Walker's sense of patriotism and loyalty is amplified, but so is his aggression. Though we didn't get to see her pre-serum, I think Carly's sense of community and togetherness is enhanced, but so is her extremism. These people are a lot more complicated than Steve or Red Skull, which makes them a lot more relatable. Seeing how it affected them was one of my favorite parts of the show. Now, I do have one gripe with the whole thing. I thought Bucky telling the truth to Yori came off as kind of rushed and rang hollow. He literally came into his apartment, said, "Yeah, I killed your son. Sorry, bro," then left. Sam made such a big deal about making the people he hurt feel better. And yes, I understand closure is a powerful thing, and that was something Yori was seriously lacking. But they didn't linger on him long enough to show that it provided him some relief, or have Bucky do anything else to try and amend it. I just wish the scene had gone on a bit longer and felt like more of a conclusion to his story. There were a few smaller issues, but that was the major one. The rest of them were mostly just nitpicks with the pacing or not getting enough details from certain characters. But that's all minor. Overall, I really enjoyed this show. However, with all that being said, I think this show needed one more episode. Why, you may ask? Well, I know it's called The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and that I said it's in service of Sam and Bucky, but they really should have devoted an episode to John Walker. Like I said, I love the character. This would be a chance to really delve into who he is as a person, both the good and the bad. They could have shown some of his past and taken the character to that next level. So, I'm going to pitch my idea for what this Walker episode could have looked like. I'm not great with coming up with names, so I'm not entirely sure what the episode title would be. The best I've got would be The Perfect Soldier. I mean, everyone's already made the connection to Erskine. Why not fully embrace it with this title? Plus, I think it would provide good juxtaposition for what the episode would reveal about Walker. To be clear, this isn't a scene-by-scene breakdown. I haven't got all the details worked out. But let me pitch you the general idea of what I'm calling Episode 4.5, The Perfect Soldier. And unlike my WandaVision repitch, this wouldn't really have any lasting impact on the following episodes. I'm sure there'd be a few adjustments, but this is more about fleshing out John as a character than moving the plot forward. Okay, so we would essentially open where Episode 4 left off, with John in the town square. Everyone is still standing there, shocked. After a moment, John speaks into his earpiece and says, "I need containment on my location, stat." With that, he starts walking away from the body of the man he just murdered. The crowd reacts, moving out of his way, maybe with some screams. Before Bucky and Sam can make a move, several armored cars arrive from various side streets, surrounding the crowd. Officers in SWAT gear come out of the back and start blocking off everyone from leaving, including Sam and Bucky. We wouldn't be explicitly told what they were doing, but the implication is they would be confiscating all cell phone footage of John's actions. Anyway, John stumbles away from the scene of the murder, and once he's out of sight, he crouches down on the shield, kind of like he did in Episode 5. Except this time, instead of flashes of scenes we've already seen, we get a flash of a new memory. It's him and Lamar, in full combat fatigues, laughing. He shakes his head, trying to clear it, and he gets another flash, this time of the two of them on an obstacle course, pushing each other to go onwards. We'll get more of these memories later in the episode, but this is just to set it up. Finally, he manages to get a hold of himself, and he gets up again. This time, though, we wouldn't be in some random warehouse. In this episode, he's going to go back to the building where they were fighting, so he can retrieve Lamar's body. I thought it was strange they didn't show this in the original episode. Lamar just disappeared. There was no mention of getting his body back to America, or the funeral. Yes, John visited the family, but it still seemed like they were missing something. For how important he was to John, it felt disrespectful not to highlight this. So, in my episode, we get that scene. A few quick slow-motion cuts of him entering the building and finding the body, then a longer slow-motion shot of John, his face emotionless, carrying Lamar's body out of the building. Still, you can tell it's weighing heavily on him. From there, we have John return to the States. He meets with the senators, like Episode 5. However, this time, it's a closed-doors meeting. No reporters or press. Basically, they say what John did was bad, but they can't backtrack on their announcement of a new Captain America so soon. So they're going to sweep it under the rug, as long as John doesn't do anything like this again. To me, this is a much more realistic reaction of the government, and a more potent commentary on what they're willing to overlook. I was honestly surprised the show didn't take this route. Even in a situation where the footage had gotten out, is it so unrealistic to imagine them saying, "John Walker did what was necessary in the heat of battle to stop a terrorist hell-bent on blowing up another GRC camp"? Not to get too political, but with some of the shady stuff governments cover up or ignore, I don't see how it's unrealistic to think they would brush this aside too. Now, I do think if the footage got out, there would be enough public pushback to eventually get him demoted, so that's why I'm not having it get released immediately. During this meeting, I think we should get the first flashback to John Walker's past, maybe after someone mentions Lamar. For this one, it should probably be him meeting Lamar for the first time. They're in military training, at the shooting range. John's having trouble putting his gun together. Everyone else around him is finishing up, but he keeps messing it up. Eventually, after it jams again, he throws it down in frustration. Lamar notices and says, Try putting that part in first. It can be the actual name of a gun part, I just don't happen to know any. The important thing is, Lamar helps him in a way that isn't demeaning to John or that makes him feel incompetent. That may seem minor, but when it comes to someone as proud as John, I think it's key to present it this way. John looks at him, then tries what he suggested. It works, and John manages to load his gun and fire. He smiles and says, "Thanks." The two introduce themselves and start talking. End of flashback. Now, there's going to be a lot of flashbacks throughout this episode. I don't know exactly what every single one would be, and I don't feel like explaining all of them in great detail, so I'm basically going to run through a list of potential ones now. Essentially, the point of the flashback should be to establish John's virtues and flaws. So we'll get some of his better moments, but his most awful ones as well. They tease us with something bad that John had done that earned him his medals, but they never reveal what it was. That was a mistake in my opinion. So one of the flashbacks should definitely be that worst day of his life he referenced. I'm not entirely sure what it would be. Could be killing a person in a fit of rage after they shot one of his fellow soldiers, though that might be too similar to what happened with Lamar. It could be them storming a building they were told had terrorists, only for John to find out after the shooting had stopped there were also children there. I don't know exactly, but it should display John's aggression in some way. However, I think we should get a few flashbacks that show John doing actual good, as a setup for his moment of redemption in the finale. It could be the moment he chose to join the military, as he wanted to help his country. It could be helping wounded soldiers on the field of battle. Or it could be something completely different. Another thing I think these flashbacks should show is a bit more of how Walker was molded by the system. Show the flaws of the institutions that created him. Maybe he could show some of that Steve-like desire to help in the early days, only for it to be squashed down by the system, represented by a commanding officer. This show does have a lot to say about how veterans are treated, and I think commenting on the military itself would be a good extension of that. From the meeting with the senators, I'm a little less clear on how the rest of the episode would go. Walker would be dealing with the mental repercussions of his actions, along with grieving for his friend. After going to Lamar's funeral, he would probably go back on the hunt for the Flag Smashers, with the flashbacks sprinkled in along the way. As for the rest of the characters, I think Sam and Bucky should be fighting to get the footage of John killing the man out to the world. Bucky, of course, has been against John this entire time, so would naturally see this as a perfect way to take him down. Sam would have come to the realization that John was only going to do harm with the shield, and that the truth needed to be put out there. Zemo wouldn't really be involved. You could have the memorial scene in this episode, or keep it in the next one. I don't really have a preference. When it comes to Carly and the Flag Smashers, I think this episode could really hone in on them as well. Show the fallout of losing one of their own in such a brutal way. They could mourn, and I think this would be a good opportunity to show how Carly gets even more extreme. This would be a good place to show how she pivots away from stealing supplies to actively attacking the GRC building in the finale. I know she already blew up the building, but this could still work as a way to show how her goals have changed. These are just a few ideas. I'm sure you could work in a couple of action scenes as the Flag Smashers try to make up for their loss by attacking someone else. You could also have Sam and Bucky trying to sneak into a building to retrieve the footage of Walker. By the end of the episode, Sam and Bucky would have succeeded, and the footage would have gotten released. People would see the footage and start to demand that Walker be held accountable. Ideally, I'd like the government to cover up for John's actions for a couple of episodes, but with the way the story unfolds so quickly, just this one would be okay. It's kind of an abrupt turnaround, but it's better than nothing. The episode could maybe end on Walker facing a protesting crowd, or with Bucky and Sam watching the news cover Walker's actions. The next episode would start basically the same. We'd still have Sam and Bucky fight John in some random warehouse and take the shield from him. Then John could be dragged in front of the committee and officially stripped of his title. From there, I think everything else could play out fairly similarly. So that's my idea for The Perfect Soldier. Wyatt Russell did an amazing job with the character of John Walker, and I think giving him an episode to shine would have been the perfect way to solidify who he was. I hope you liked my pitch for this episode. If you have any ideas for scenes or plots you think should be included in this episode, or just want to let me know what you thought of it, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you, and thank you so much for watching.